Welcome back to the OIS Podcast. In this episode, John Snisarenko, COO Oyster Point Pharmaceuticals, talks about his career and how it brought him to Oyster Point in time for their successful IPO. He credits their unique approach to dry eye disease as part of the reason for their success, but not the only reason. Let's listen to hear more.
Hello and welcome to the OIS Podcast. I'm Dr. Paul Karpecki, and I have the privilege today to get to meet with John Snisarenko at Oyster Point Pharmaceuticals. John has been well known in eye care. Certainly it was a name that we all knew well, that really made a difference at Shire in terms of the lifitegrast and Xiidra launch. And so I'm excited to get to know John a little better, for all of us too, in terms of his background, but also to understand where Oyster Point is now with OCO1. It's got to be, probably getting close. Very exciting time as far as, the potential for approval, what it's going to mean to eye care practitioners, their strategy around education. We're going to go through all of that today, but let me start by welcoming you, John. It's an honor to have you on the program.
Yeah, good to see you again, Paul. I wish I could see you in person very shortly. Hopefully we'll get out there and I could actually shake your hand again.
I look forward to that too. It's funny, all these virtual calls, which are great. We made the most of all of this, and I love these podcast interviews, but there's just something still special about being in person again. I look forward to that too, and it couldn't come soon enough. I am kind of curious, about your background. I was thinking about that earlier when I got the privilege of getting to interview you here. And I thought, I've known John for a while. I don't know that I know how, where you grew up. I knew we had a Canadian connection.
That's
that
right.
certainly played a role. But tell me a little bit about your personal background, growing up, education, and then maybe after that, we'll get into your kind of pathway into eye care.
Yeah, no, it sounds great, Paul. So I grew up in Montreal, Canada, French Canada. Went to school in English. So a lot of people say, how come you don't have that French accent? But I went to school pretty well my whole time in English. And the interesting thing that a lot of people didn't really know is really when I was in high school, I did a work study program at an optometrist's office because I was interested in eye care. I started wearing contact lenses at 13 and I started visiting the optometrist and I thought this is kind of cool. So I did a work study for 2 weeks and that's where I kind of got the eye care bug. And, we can talk about how I continue to pursue that. But early age that I really got into eye care.
That's neat, but you didn't go the optometry route. You decided to kind of look at maybe big picture, running big corporations, being key roles, getting to be part of an IPO. So I'd say you made a good choice. It's interesting how that bug kind of starts. So eye care probably wasn't your first out of school, out of college and university. It wasn't kind of your first step, or was it?
Well, I did, it's interesting. My first job was actually in eye care, but I did my biochem degree with still kind of the potential to maybe get into eye care. But after I did my biochem, I started working as a rep for Alcon back in '87. So long time, the company car was really a company horse and buggy. So it was a long time ago. And I did a stint at Alcon and Allergan as a rep while I was doing my MBA part-time at McGill. So I did both biochem and my MBA at McGill University in Montreal.
Oh, that's pretty neat. So you are one of the rare people I get to interview that actually started in eye care. What was the path then? You were Alcon first, Allergan. I mean, certainly Shire, was that immediately after those with lifitegrast or Xiidra launch, and then the opportunity to Oyster Point? Tell me how that came about.
Yeah, no, there's quite a few steps in between. So after, carrying the bag at Alcon Allergan, once I finished my MBA, I was really interested in marketing. So I got right into marketing over-the-counter artificial tears with Allergan, moved to Toronto from Montreal. And then really where I spent a lot of my career in Canada for 14 years was I joined Ciba Vision to really start their ophthalmics division, because Ciba Vision at the time was just known for contact lenses and lens care solutions. And then through the acquisition of IOLab, I had the privilege to run kind of the first ophthalmic part of that business. And that Ciba Vision then morphed into Novartis Ophthalmics, and they brought on Visudyne, back of the eye stuff. And so 14 years later is when I actually jumped to the US. I went to San Francisco, joined Genentech and ran their ophthalmology for about 5.5 years, and then moved on to run rheumatology for 5.5 years. So but good 10 and a half, 11 years at Genentech. Only then I moved back east with Shire to join a team that just launched Xiidra. And then we know the story with Takeda buying Shire and then obviously divesting Xiidra to Novartis. And right after that, I joined Oyster Point, September 2019, probably three or 4 months before the IPO.
Wow. What was it like being up there during an IPO on the NASDAQ or the setup? Was it a surreal experience?
Yeah, it's a once in a lifetime experience for sure. It's something I've never done before. The interesting part is initially when you're really telling a story of the company and the science and so on, you're telling it to investors. I'm so used to speaking with physicians and practitioners and eye care specialists, and all of a sudden your audience is investors and the street. And so it was a very great experience and kind of a whirlwind because you cover so many investors over kind of a period of 2 weeks just to get your story out. And then obviously with the interesting approach we have to dry eye, there was a lot of interest. So it was a very successful IPO.
Wow, certainly was, and certainly a great background to it. I love how you started in sales, then had that interest in marketing, also have the investor side, makes you incredibly rounded. Was the stint outside of eye care beneficial? Was it just kind of neutral? Did it give you any further insights, or would you just have stayed in eye care the whole time through?
Yeah, that 5.5 years was interesting in rheumatology because literally just learning the immunology process, and there's so many eye diseases that have that component in it. So it was interesting to connect all that. So I've been in eye care, and we know eye care is so diverse. Everything from, I've been cataract surgery side, the contact lens side, over the counter, the prescription, retina, but the immunology aspect of it was something that really complemented what I did in eye care for all those years. So I was very happy to get back into eye care because it was really kind of rounded it all out, and it was fun.
That's pretty neat. Now, was it things just fell into place as you went along, or were you picking up certain things that you would say, knowing this helped me to get to the next level? Like even going from sales to marketing, we probably have some listeners who are in that situation. Interest.
Yeah, it's good to really do as much as you can, get a diverse set of skills and background. And, the sales aspect is one component. You're frontline and you're visiting the eye care practitioners and detailing your product. But then marketing, you have to think a little bit more. How do you tell your story more broadly? So that's very complementary. And then I was just fortunate timing wise that CIBA Vision was going through some transitions. So I got to run CIBA Vision Canada. So a little bit more general management experience and some other functions kind of reporting in other than sales and marketing. So that part of my past in Canada really helped me to transition to the big businesses that are in the US, especially with Genentech launching Lucentis. That was a big foray into wet AMD and big team, big investments behind everything. So it definitely prepared me to kind of look at it more broadly, in a diverse fashion.
What helped you make, because the IPO for Oyster Point was very successful, good launch, came up above, oversubscribed and kind of rose very nicely. And certainly now the street's kind of waiting to see what happens with approvals and other things. But what do you think made it such a success? There's so many companies right now that are looking, maybe, should I go IPO? Should I stay right? What made that such a successful launch?
I mean, part of it is the platform you're working on. We did feel we had a very unique approach to dry eye. It's basically the philosophy of Oyster Point is we want to follow the science and look at very novel approaches to treating eye disease. And we're specifically focusing on ocular surface disease. So, we saw in the past a lot of the approach was kind of more the anti-inflammatory immunomodulator. And we thought, let's take a look at it from a very different perspective. And so the mode of action and the route of administration is very unique. And it kind of brings you back to school where, that nose eye connection that, a lot of your basal tears are formed through, you're breathing through your nose and really the trigeminal system. So that part of the story was very interesting to investors when we went out there and started to tell them how we're approaching, dry eye disease. So that's what I believe led to the success of the IPO. And even now, there's a lot of inbound interest now that we're getting closer to potential approval in October of this year. There's a lot of inbound interest to join our team. We're growing quite quickly here at Oyster Point.
Yeah, potential for October is exciting. So what What stage, what is the company working on now, focusing? I mean, obviously you can't promote until we have an FDA approval, but you're getting your team in place. You're looking at disease state awareness. What are your plans in both the eye care professional space, or do you do them together because it's a dry eye type product?
Yeah. So definitely building out that commercial organization. As we're now doing all the pre-launch activities and kind of preparations, building that team out. I've got the head of sales, Mike Campbell, who's got to build a pretty large team. So that takes some time. So we started those efforts already, and that'll go out throughout the summer. But from a disease state awareness, we want to tell the story around there really is no substitute for natural tears and kind of the beneficial components of natural tears: lipids, proteins, growth factors, inherent anti-inflammatory properties in your tear film, antimicrobial properties. That's the story I think that we want to remind folks, that natural tear film has so many beneficial components. That's part of the education we're doing now. It's completely kind of dissociated from OCO1 that's going through the FDA approval process, but just kind of reminding everyone on the natural tear film and how that works with the eye and the nose connection and so on.
I agree with that. I mean, you think about an artificial tear, there's a few components, but there's nothing to the level of the number of proteins, the lysozyme, the antimicrobials, the number of lipids alone, in terms of, even though it's such a small layer, and of course mucins. It's incredibly complex, and nothing is quite like that. I love that message.
One of the things we thought of early on when we were designing our phase 3 clinical trial is to make it as real world as possible. So we basically had all comers that were part of the trial, from mild, moderate to the more severe dry eye. So at the end, when we do talk about our clinical results after approval, hopefully that'll mimic really the real world kind of patient that walks through your door. So that was part of the strategy.
One thing you did exceptionally well, you, the team, Bob, and others with Xiidra, was you came out, and this was at the time kind of novel, actually, with the same amount of involvement of both the eye care professionals, ophthalmology and optometry, because you're going to get prescribing on both sides. And I think you're very rewarded, because at one point, 68% of the prescriptions were coming from optometry, which we've not seen with any other therapeutic agent, shy of perhaps allergy drops to date. Is that an approach you're thinking of implementing again with that success? Is there
absolutely. Yeah, no, the optometry specialty as well as ophthalmology are both very, very important for the dry eye patient and other therapeutic areas as well. So we're going to have just as much effort at both specialties. And interestingly enough, when you look at the demographic of your dry eye patients, some of the older patients that are going in for cataract surgery and so on and so forth, they have dry eye as well. They see more of the ophthalmologists and the optometrists as well. And then there's the younger demographic as well. And now that we're all staring at Zoom screens for the last, call it year and a half, we've got a younger demographic that's starting to suffer from inadequate blinking and some dry eye. So I think the market is naturally expanding. And I think part of our role and our strategy to really try to educate the population, the patients, go and get your eyes checked, and see if we can catch dry eye a little earlier in the disease progression.
I agree. And it is great to see. I've seen superstars coming up in the area, like focusing on dry eye and ocular surface disease, more so than even cornea in ophthalmology and in optometry, it becoming its own kind of subset that's so critical. And it's good to see that, because there's plenty with the Zoom calls you said, and with the demographics and the changes, there's more than enough, and it creates a neat opportunity. So obviously your hands are pretty full with a potential approval in the fall, as soon as October. Kind of backing up, what's the plans for the company? Do you see this being really what you're going to focus on? Are you looking for other potential, acquisitions, partnership opportunities? Where's the company from a macro perspective in terms of their thoughts? It might be a tough time to ask that question when you're about to launch, perhaps in just a few months, but what's the company thinking long term?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Priority one is we want to gain approval by the FDA for OCO1 and then commercialize and launch. So all hands on deck from a commercial perspective, getting that ready, from a manufacturing perspective, getting that ready. But more longer term, the one thing that impressed me joining Jeff and team is that that investment in R&D. And we really have not talked a lot about our R&D and what we're working on, but what thing we want to become is really the premier ophthalmic company, eye care company focused on ocular surface disease. So there's not just dry eye. Dry eye is kind of our first foray into the space, but there's lots of unmet need in this space, and we're looking at a lot of things. And we brought on both Marion Maxey as our Chief Medical Officer and Eric Carlson as our Head of Development and R&D, and those two talents definitely are adding to that scientific curiosity and everything we're looking at from a pipeline, and investment perspective. So, we want to become that premier company that focuses on ocular surface disease, and hopefully 3-4 years from now, it's something that we'll be talking about a whole portfolio of approaches to these diseases.
It is exciting. Yeah, I mean, certainly you have to compliment Jeff's leadership, yours. I mean, really assembled an incredible team. And you look at the team there, product going through FDA process, but now late stage, and you think of the team that's surrounding it, there's got to be bigger goals and pictures. And it sounds like that's exactly what's in mind. I mean, I think this in of itself is going to be significant. But it's good to hear that the company's not going to say, okay, this is exciting, we've got something great, should the approval occur, we're going to still continue to hone in on the ocular surface disease space. And there's a lot of need in that space. And I like that area of division because it is more than dry eye, and there's significant areas to approach. You're the perfect person for me to ask this question because you've worked in many different settings and many different sizes of organizations, from Genentech, as big as they get, Allergan, and others, to also here as a startup with a product potentially launching later in the year, next year, depending on FDA approval. So, you have any advice for listeners that are maybe in a large organization who have aspirations of, launching a company or joining a startup such as this? Is this a good route for them to go, and what advice would you give them?
Yeah, no, great question, Paul. I mean, I've spent a lot of my career at the larger companies and here and there at smaller companies. And, larger companies, you walk into a pretty well-oiled machine. A lot of the processes, policies, everything's in place. And, you basically have your therapeutic area you're in charge of, and you want to maximize that opportunity. But a lot of the infrastructure around you is already in place. At a startup, you're literally building all that as you're continuing the development and so on with your platform. So if you love that energy of rolling up your sleeves and getting everything built from scratch, and that especially if this is your first asset in the space, this is the first time we're commercializing something at Oyster Point. So building that whole infrastructure and everything around it takes some time, and it's high energy. So I think that's what I would say if you're looking to go to a startup. Be prepared to roll up your sleeves, and sometimes it's a cliche, but sometimes you're kind of building the plane as you fly it, right? And because you've got to get things in process and parallel, but it's fun. It's a lot of fun, and we're attracting a lot of folks because they love that energy, and it's kind of entrepreneurial. And the beauty of a startup as well is you're building the team from scratch as well. So you're able to really look at the talent that's out there, and hopefully, the platforms we have are attractive for that talent to come to Oyster Point as well.
It sure seems like that's exactly what's happening. And it is, you're so correct about that energy, and creating that. Is that something that is just getting the right people in place that helps create it? Is it a combination of that with the leadership? Why do some companies like yours have such a great energy that attracts the superstars and excitement that goes with it to such a level?
That's another great question, Paul. I think, culture is something that is developed and evolves from within, and you've got to nurture it, right? So you can't ignore it, or else culture just kind of forms on its own. But being able to step back and talk about the how we're going to do things. Some of our credos are like, really follow the science, make sure that we're thinking about patients first when we're looking at something. These are things that kind of help build that culture, so people approach things differently. If you do those two right, follow the science and really, follow the patient journey, then the other things kind of fall into place. So, but you've got to nurture it. And I think that an investment in the culture, especially when you're growing very, very quickly, is an important part of the aspect of a startup as well.
do you create that? Is it just the communications? Is it just allowing people to connect at a different level? I mean, obviously been a little different in this COVID era for sure, but what are the steps? Because culturing, I love that. The culture is really the key. I love how you said nurturing it, because I don't think people focus. They just kind of say, well, the culture fell into place, perhaps. You guys have really nurtured it. How's that done, if that's not too specific of a question?
Yeah, no, it definitely, high communication is key. And it was a challenge in the pandemic era as well. We started off with Zoom meetings. It looked like the Brady Bunch with 9 squares, and now a company meeting is 80 people. So, and it's still high touch. We still meet as a company every week, and we go through a lot of things, not just, just even how is everybody feeling over the pandemic, to how's the science progressing, how are we building the commercial organization. The part that's important in a startup is all the interdependencies amongst the functions, because manufacturing has to be ready, and quality has to be ready, and commercial has to be ready, and we have to talk to one another so that when we are ready of the investment, that definitely builds the culture of the company.
That's fantastic. This is a terrific interview, John. You shared some amazing insights. I love the granularity we got into in establishing a culture. I think that's so valuable for anybody listening in, and for innovative companies to succeed. But it was great to also get to know your background, one of the few that really started right in eye care and has created this incredible legacy.
Not a lot of people knew that. But now you know.
I did not, but I'm impressed, and I can see the results are obviously very positive because of that experience. But I guess, well, certainly, all my best to Oyster Point, to you, Jeff, the entire team. We got a great group there. I'm excited to hear of progress and hope that continues to go well. And certainly thank you for sharing so much of your insights with everyone here today.
No, thank you for the opportunity, Paul. It was a pleasure.
Thank you for listening. John's experiences and knowledge will help many innovators find their way. To learn what innovators in Israel are doing, register now for the OIS Israel Innovation Showcase, Thursday, June 10th at 12 p.m. Eastern Time. And come back next week to hear what's new on the OIS Podcast.